Today, we're going to learn how to do a still life drawing. First, collect your materials. Once you have your materials, go ahead and set up your still life. Collect items from around your house and make sure you display them in a well-lit area. When looking at your still life, try to identify shapes within the objects that are easy for you to draw. If I were to begin my drawing with the books, I could identify their rectangular shape or the circular shape of the shell. I can identify those easy shapes as placeholders in my drawing before adding detail. Begin by identifying those shapes in your drawing. Once you have your easy shapes placed on the drawing, you can go back and start to identify more of the space your objects are occupying. Think about using diagonal lines to push backwards into space, creating a more 3D image instead of a flat drawing. Continue to use the element of line to increase the detail that you have in the objects. After your base drawing is done, you can start to create more detailed elements. Keep in mind that even though I intend to add color to this drawing, this is something that you can also finish in just pencil. You can increase the value and keep adding detail to the image you already have, and you can complete this with only using pencil. And before I continue any further with the drawing, of course, I want to check in on my drawing buddy. She's not very happy that I woke her up. From my point of view, I want to now start to find where I see my darkest darks and some of my lightest lights. This is where I can start to capture my value, as I see a lot of shadows built up in between the flowers and from one book onto the other. I also want to start to identify my lightest lights, which will be my highlights and on the tops of my flowers. Continue to move throughout your drawing, pushing harder with your pencil to increase where the shadows and values will be. You can go ahead and almost use a scribbling motion to go in between the areas you know will be dark and where you know will be light. Again, I'm not going to worry about the little lines in here because I can use my eraser to take them away. I'm still focusing on only increasing the value and identifying the shapes I know I can still recognize and draw. There might be a shadow over here because, again, this shell is blocking the light coming from this direction. So I'll add a shadow on that corner of the book. And if I were to look back at my still life, and as you can see, I went ahead and I started to add more identifying lines in the mason jar. So instead of just starting with my normal circle, which I then gave a little bit more of a rectangular form to, I went now and I gave it more of a cornered look, touching it fully to the book at the bottom, creating value between that. I can also go back and continue to add value in areas that my image is lacking. Don't think so much about the object you're trying to draw and more of just where the lines go and what shape the object is holding. Let's jump back and take a look at my still life again. I'm going to start to identify more details in my flowers. As you can see, I've already started this group of purple. It's going to be right there. And now I'm going to continue to identify shapes that I can recognize, like how the tulip or that rose kind of spirals up and it's in the shape of an oval, compared to the smaller ones like these white ones over here and on this side would be much smaller squiggles. We're receiving live action from the drawing buddy as I attempt to add more detail to my flowers. I wanted to focus on where I see some of my darker areas, like in the flowers and the roses here and at the bottom on this side and up top, compared to the lighter areas that I see in the center, again with these smaller purple and white flowers. I began to identify that value in my flowers by using the side of my pencil and scribbling in value to the roses and again the flowers that held a darker color. Callie is confirming that the still life is in a good area. And in addition to pushing the value in the flowers, I will do so throughout. I also want to remember that I can use my eraser to go back and capture some of my lighter areas if it has gotten too dark or I have lines that are unnecessary. So this is my time where I can go back and increase the highlight that I had on the side of my mason jar, remembering that the mason jar is see-through, so I do want to get rid of some of those extra lines. I can go back into the tops of my flowers and maybe go back and just capture some more highlighted areas that I might have gotten too dark with just using my pencil. And as I'm working hard, she's hardly working at all. When getting very close to finishing my drawing in just black and white, I want to remember that my objects are not floating. So I went ahead and I added my surface or a line indicating the tabletop that my objects are sitting on. And I also went back and again, I added the value of the shadows being casted onto the table from the books and the shells. Values are all right in here, so I wanted to make sure I captured all of those shadows. And now to pick out colors. I am keeping my cold colors separate from my warm colors. And instead of using the colors depicted in the still life I have, I am choosing to go a little bit more abstract with the colors I use. Let's see how it turns out. Remember, I can switch up all the colors in this still life and have as much fun as I want. It doesn't have to be perfect to be art. I'm going to begin by adding a little bit of blue to some of the shadowy areas that I know I will have in the drawing. So I can use this as the first indicator to some of the shadows I have. Once I have an area that has a little bit of the blue, I can go back and start to mix in some other colors. Again, staying with the cold colors in my shadowy areas and the hot colors in my highlighted areas. As I build up value, I can move on to different colors. Again, I want to make sure I'm staying true to the shapes I'm drawing and coloring in. Once I filled in most of my shadowy areas with the colder colors I chose to work with, I now want to switch over and begin adding my highlighted areas. Starting with yellow as my brightest color, I want to start by accenting some of the highlighted areas I know I had in the mason jars and some of the areas in the flowers. Again, most of those were up top. And I'm not worried about what flowers look like. Again, I'm focusing on drawing the shapes and the line elements I know I can draw. If that happens to just be squiggles, then just draw squiggles. But remember to fill in the space so that your picture holds volume. Now I will continue working with the other two hot colors. And since I am working with crayons or a pastel-y material, I will go ahead and pick up my white and begin to blend and pull some of the colors together in my lightest areas. Again, using white to increase my highlights, and I will switch over to use black or a gray to increase my shadows. Here we can see that I already went in with the white, but this is something that you can go back in and over top of. As you can see, the white will pull the colors so I can get that glassy look in this mason jar. Again, using my diagonal lines to create space within the object. This is pushing the highlights versus lowlights, or the highlights versus shadows. Remember that even if you start to lose some of your line work blending your colors, you can go back and accent some of those lines like we did when we highlighted and added shadows to the mason jar. So as I'm drawing and I'm coloring in with my white crayon, my colors are mixing, but I want to make sure that I'm using lines that follow the shape of whatever I'm coloring in. So my table behind my objects run left to right. It's a horizontal table, so my lines need to run horizontally to show that the table is flat. Similar to the marks I've made in my flowers, I wanted to use arched lines and lines that followed the shape of my flowers. And as I did in the center, I've kind of swirled them and made them bumpy, so the flowers look softer and rounder. So now I'm going to start by taking my gray crayon, and just like I added the black marks into the mason jar and I blended those colors with the white crayon, I'm going to take my gray and mix in some of the area of my shadowed parts. So all of the spots that got my purples, my blues, and my greens. Instead of using black to blend that shadow, I will use gray and then again go back to accent my objects with black lines. Here I was able to blend my colors with the gray, and still following the rule of my lines, I can take my black crayon and add accent lines for detail and diagonal lines along my objects once again to create space within the object. Continue blending and adding more lines and colors, increasing value and space. Okay, last check on the sleeping buddy and on the still life. Here is the drawing. We're going to start by realizing the use of line and color in the still life and how it compares to the volume we have in the flowers. We also want to realize that it's okay to use black as an outline sometimes if it helps emphasize where your shapes are. All right, and now you can go in and do a final check of the drawing and check out all the detail you were able to capture. Notice that I used vertical lines on the background behind the flower to emphasize more space. But overall, she's complete.